You're listening to I Love It When, and I'm your host, Mo. I'm a speaker, coach, and connector. You're in the right place if you're looking for some inspiration and you're ready to truly embrace who you are. My intention with this podcast is to help you see that you are so much more powerful than you realize. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of I Love It When. I'm your host, Mo, and I am super excited for you to hear this conversation today with Justin Schenck. Justin was referred to me by a friend, Erica Wright, and he has one of the top podcasts in the world. I'll pull up his bio here because I got to read you part of it. Okay, he's the host of the Inc. magazine top-rated podcast, The Growth Now Movement, and the host of the world-renowned event, Growth Now Movement Live. In this podcast, we talk about how in high school he thought he should have been voted least likely to succeed. And then he was introduced to personal development at the age of 19, and it changed everything and gave him an opportunity to start looking at adversity as an opportunity to grow. And so he launched the Growth Now Movement podcast in 2016, and it now is heard in over 100 countries all over the world. And so we discuss how this developed and why he stayed so consistent and how it has changed his life. Now, I wanted to have him on the podcast, not only because I trust Erica and her opinion and perspective on people, but because during our first Zoom meeting, I pay attention to people's energy and their interactions and just how they are with me. And I can tell that he has pure intentions and that he really truly wants to help people. And then the way that he followed up with me after email later, offering to help and be a resource to me, all of those things matter. And so I really felt like this was a conversation that everybody would benefit from, and his story and how he has continued to push with growth, I just love. So we talk about intuition on this episode. We talk about what has he learned through interviewing people every single week, you guys, for the last 7 years. You learn things when you do this. It's part of the reason why I love podcasting so much. So here's Justin Schenck. Take a listen, and then please share this episode with your friends and family and social media, and don't hesitate to tag him, tag myself. This is a really lovely story that I'm excited to share with you all. So welcome. Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of I Love It When. I'm really excited today to have my guest Justin Schenck on the episode and share with you not only his story and how we came connected, but I think there's a lot that we're going to get from this episode around personal growth and really diving into your discomfort and that zone that we often talk about. So I wanted to start out by sharing why I'm having Justin on the podcast. And one reason is because a good friend of mine, Erica Wright, referred me and connected us. But beyond that, I have to say, really, truly, for me, it's actually our interaction that we had on Zoom the first time that we met. And so I'm very in tune with people's energy, and I really appreciated just how authentic you were, truly yourself. I felt that. And then your follow-up afterwards in email matters a lot to me. And so whenever I can tell that somebody really truly wants to help people, I'm like, yes, I'm supposed to be connected to this person. So thank you for saying yes to joining us on here. Appreciate it.
I'm honored. I've seen what you've been able to build and the impact that you're creating and who you are as a person. And so it was a no-brainer for me to come on and have a chat. And I always love good conversation. And I feel like even our first talk where we talked business, like it could have been recorded and sent out, and just really excited to be here.
Yeah, totally. Well, cool. Start out by sharing with everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do, just to begin.
Yeah, isn't that the hardest question to answer as an entrepreneur in 2023? Yes. Who are you, right? So who I am is a guy who is very, very fortunate to be in a loving relationship, about to get married, which is crazy. I play the role of bonus dad every single day to her 2 kids, and that's been a role that I never thought that I would fill. But at the end of the day, the real question is, what do you do? But I'm a podcaster, and that's where it all starts, and everything I do kind of spins off of that. I like to say the podcast that I host, called The Growth Now Movement, is the center of the wheel, and everything else I do is really a spoke off of it, right? Whether it be live events or speaking, or I have a mastermind now and community, and I have a couple businesses in the podcast space as well. But really for me, it's everything I do is impact driven. Everything I do is to help people get their message heard, because I think every single person has an important message, and a ton of people in the world that need to hear it. And so everything I say yes to falls in line with, does this further my impact or the impact of others? And that's why I've become in this space almost by chance. And I'm sure we'll get into it. But it's been a wild ride over the last 7 years, but I'm blessed to be here and be in this position.
So you've had your podcast for 7 years now.
Yeah, which is
doing weekly episodes, right?
Yeah. And so I took one longer break early on.
Okay.
So I used to have a co-host when I started, and I asked him to take a step back, and I took about 2 months off, and I kind of did a relaunch. It was the same name, so I don't even want to say a rebrand, even though we changed some of the stuff. And then I took a break actually this last December. So, a month and a half ago, I took a break. I was like, you know what? I'm not enjoying this as much as I used to. And I think it was that whole, like, just getting episodes out to get them out, and took a month off, and it was the greatest blessing for me. And my audience has grown even more since I came back. You always worry as a podcaster, like showing up, I gotta be there. I gotta be there. So there was a little fear, but also like I had to serve myself in a way. And so that was the only time. So you figure in 7 years, a 3-month break, that's, total, that's pretty wild. And to kind of talk about like the growth of podcasting, when I started podcasting, people will go, "What's a podcast?" Like that tells you how much the world has changed now. And now I tell them I have a podcast, and they go, "Oh, you have one too." Right. So everybody's doing it now, but I love the medium. I love that people get to build a brand and a platform for themselves using it. And more importantly, share a great message.
I know, because I've done a podcast before, and I've only been in this current one for about 6 months, but the consistency it takes to get yourself to a place where you're doing it weekly, it's a lot of energy and so I love that you shared that about the break, because I think so often we all think, oh, if I take a break, my whole world's going to fall apart. If I rest, my business is not going to thrive. And it seems to be the opposite, really.
It really is. I mean, I think taking that time for yourself to hold the peace, right? To make sure that, hey, just because I've been doing it for 7 years, is this the thing that it's supposed to align with? Like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And I think when you're in it as an entrepreneur, it's hard sometimes to take a step back and look at the full picture. I'm grateful that I'm back in it, and I'm having amazing conversations and continuing to serve from that standpoint. But you always have to take that break every once in a blue moon to say, is this the right way? Like, say it's like your physical health, right? You're training a certain way for how long? And you're like, I'm not getting the results. Well, maybe you need to take a break and reevaluate how you're approaching it. I mean, that's just life.
And I wanted to start off too by sharing part of your story back from high school, because I love on your bio on your website how it says that you could have been voted least likely to succeed, or you would have voted yourself that. And I'm wondering if you could share a bit about your experience in high school and why you would have considered yourself least likely to succeed.
Yeah, I kind of wish there was a senior superlative for least likely to succeed, so I would have won something. But yeah, I found myself my junior year of high school, my personal life really fell apart. My mom was in the middle of a 20-year opioid battle, and my dad was in jail at the time. And so I was totally checked out of school. I didn't care. Very much that typical, like, he's smart enough to be here, but he's not here. Right? He's not here mentally. And so I had a 1.7 GPA, which, if you know anything about how that works about getting into college, junior year is the most heavily weighted. And so college was not the path for me. I later found out as an adult, like, ADD is my path. And so sitting in a classroom and being talked to was just not conducive for me learning. I consider myself a lifelong learner now, which is really funny. But yeah, I mean, just a terrible student, my life falling apart. And so all signs pointed to, you've got no shot, kid. And so I was fortunate enough at the age of 19, I got into direct sales, and I really learned a lot. And I found a great mentor who handed me a book, and the book was Who Moved My Cheese? And that book, if you haven't read it, by the way, highly recommend. It takes 45 minutes to read the whole thing. And I'm a slow reader. It took me 45 minutes. And so, the book is really about how change is inevitable, right? Like, things are going to change around you. You have no control over that, but it's all about how you react to those things around you. And it kind of gave me that aha moment of like, wait, I have complete control over my life. And thus began a long journey of finding out what's my why, and why am I here? What's my purpose? But it all began with that book. And I was able to make many, many steps from there to build many failed businesses, and then to finally figure it out when I launched the podcast 7 years ago.
So in terms of that, when you were introduced to personal development, what was it that specifically caught your attention? Was it the fact that it was all about how you respond versus react? Was that the main thing that got you as a 19-year-old kid? It's a pretty big deal for that to catch your attention.
I grew up really fast. So when I was much younger, when I was 12, I broke my first hip, which took me out of youth sports, and shattered it into 5 pieces. It took me out of youth sports. And then 18 months after that, my second hip fell out of the socket. And so I kind of just sat around and started to figure things out. And I realized at 14, I'd rather hang out with 40-year-olds than other 14-year-olds. And very, very quickly, just because of my home environment, I became very, very self-aware. And so at 19, I was able to learn. I feel like I was able to learn lessons faster than most 19-year-olds. Not to say I didn't make mistakes. I mean, I'm 38 now and I still make plenty of mistakes. But for me, it was really about understanding that being able to take control over your actions, right? Like the biggest thing was, to own failure and to own setbacks, even if they weren't caused by you. But if you owned them and you say, why is this happening for me instead of to me? And you get out of that victim mindset, you're able to go, okay, well, how can I utilize this to help me grow? And so I learned that at a young age. And that got me into self-development, but also the idea that there's these mentors and these stories that I can learn from other people that I had access to by buying a book. And honestly, the podcast was a similar thing, right? I have access to sit down and ask the questions that I need to help me grow. I always say that the first 2 years of the podcast, every single one of those questions were personally for me. I was just trying to figure it out. And so still to this day, I reach out to people and have them on the show. If I'm like, you know what? Pretty impressed with what they're doing. I'd love to learn from them. And so it's a great tool in order to do that. So I went from reading books, which I still do, but from reading books to going, okay, I can actually sit down with these people and ask them the questions that I need. So yeah, I think it's that evolution of just constant learning.
I love that you said what you said about how it served you, because I often share that with people, that the retreats that I've created, and it's all been for me first, like to fill my cup. And then the benefit is that it does serve other people. But that whole concept of we've got to fill our cup first, or we have to be what people deem selfish sometimes. It's not actually selfish. You're actually serving other people through doing that, through making yourself the best version. So I love that you said that.
Yeah. And I love that you hit on that, because when we think about individuals, most entrepreneurs in any space, I mean, you can be an auto mechanic in some way, shape, or form, you're serving others. And we tend to get in this whole entire grind of like, I have to keep serving, I have to keep serving, I have to keep giving, but you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And so I have daily non-negotiables that are self-serving to me. And I make sure I do them every single day to make sure my cup is full so I can continue to serve. And so even these retreats, I mean, I'm in a similar space as you, developing these retreats and these events. I actually launched a mastermind at my retreat this last weekend. And part of the launch was like, look, this mastermind is not about me sitting down and teaching you things. This mastermind is about us coming together and teaching each other things. Like it's as selfish for me to be in it as it should be as selfish for you to be in it, And so just really, really fortunate to be in a role that I can facilitate those things, not only for others, but for myself, selfishly.
Yeah, I totally agree. So where were you? This is kind of a funny question to ask about the start of your Growth Now Movement podcast, but actually, where were you when the idea came to you? Or was it just something that developed?
Yeah, I don't know exactly where I was when I first came up with the idea, but the original idea behind it was, hey, let me start. Let me back up a little bit. I had 3 failed businesses, but I always had this dream of being an entrepreneur and creating my own life and setting my own schedule and not being on the grind from 9 to 5 and clocking in and clocking out and doing those things, right? And so I tried to launch multiple businesses. Some had mild success, but ultimately failed, but all 3 failed. And I was like, I'm clearly doing something wrong. And I said, ultimately, let's start this podcast. Let me pick the brains of entrepreneurs and see how they did it so I can start to utilize those tools into my life. And
were they all different industries? Sorry, I have to ask.
No, yeah. So the three businesses I launched.
Yeah.
Yes. So the first one was actually an events company. Me and a business partner put together events that focus on personal and professional growth. And we did things like entrepreneurial events, and they were all local. We did the first ever nonprofit expo in my hometown. And what we ended up doing was we're like, hey, let's start let's do a business expo. And we spent a lot of money on marketing, and we spent a lot of money on our keynote speaker. We were bringing in a guy named Bill Rancic, who he won the first season of The Apprentice. So that tells you how long ago we are, right? That guy, the guy who hosted that thing, became our president and then stopped being our president. Like, we're talking a long time. So we hired Bill Rancic, paid him a lot of money, and we ended up selling 3 tickets to the event. And so that bankrupted us, and we're like, okay, I guess that's it for that. The second one was actually an app. We tried to launch an app, a social app, and that failed. And then the third one was actually a business that ended up being successful for me. But that was actually in the podcast coaching and production space, which I still have that company now. I don't talk often about it, but from time to time, I'll take on certain clients depending on who they are. And I work with them from that standpoint. So it was actually that business that was the last one that failed. And then obviously ended up picking it back up and running with it after I figured out some things. But the crazy thing is about the podcast, 6 months before I launched the show, no, I'm sorry, 3 months before I launched the show, my mom actually lost her 20-year battle to opioids. Wow. And so when she passed away, it completely rocked my world and made me take a step back and go, life is so much more than just chasing things. And ultimately I came to this realization of I was chasing entrepreneurship, money, success, cars, girls, houses, the things that society said that is success for a male. I was chasing those things because I thought ultimately when I got them, I'd be happy. I watched my mom battle opioids, and I always say this. My mom was the most caring, loving individual on the planet. She was a great mom. She was my best friend. And, she just couldn't figure out how to love herself. And that's ultimately why she passed away. And so for me, when she passed away, I actually went on a 3-month bender where I was blackout drunk 6 nights a week. And when I kind of came out of that and decided I need to sit and feel this and grieve and do all these things, I woke up from all that and I kind of went, oh, wait, I don't love myself either. And so when I launched the podcast, the conversations really became like, what's self-love? Like, how did you find hope in your rock bottom moments when you weren't hitting your goals or you weren't living the life that you expected? And I honestly think like that vulnerability in those conversations from my standpoint are probably the reason the show took off. And it wasn't this contrived thing where I had to be a certain way or ask the right questions or say, hey, let's how do I build a funnel or what? I don't even know if funnels were a thing back then. I'm sure they were, but like all that stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, there were so many shifts in the launch of the podcast. So I don't know where I was when I first came up with it. I thought it was a great idea. Maybe in the back of my head, I said, it would be really cool if this took off and I could build like a brand, right? And start speaking. Cause I always like speaking or being in front of people in some way, shape or form, but I never really thought that was the reality. I was like, I'll just build a business off of what I learned. And then ultimately that's what it did for me. And now I speak all over the country and I do some really cool stuff. So I think sometimes it's not necessarily the way we were going to get to where we were going to go, but as long as we stay true to ourselves, we'll figure it out.
Wow. It just makes me think like, what a gift. So I kind of am that type of person that I think you are as well, that I like to go deep on a lot of different topics. Like, so immediately what comes to mind is like, what a gift your mom gave you in so many ways. Yeah. So the non-negotiables that you mentioned that you have, because that was partly part of your self-love process. What are those things that you have to do every day to show that to yourself?
Yeah. So first, I think what my mom went through was an absolute gift for me. And I think that's a mindset thing. I didn't think it at first. That's for sure. I didn't think it while I was going through it. But all adversity in some way, shape or form can be a gift as long as we see it that way. And so I realized that after when I was in that 3-month bender, that was my rock bottom moment. Right. And I realized that in order for me to get out of my rock bottom moment, I had to declare it. And I said, this is it. This is my rock bottom moment. Meaning bad things are going to happen to me again. But I'm going to react to them in such a different way. And so that was a massive mindset shift for me. And it's, and so for me, that was a huge step. So I'm so glad you brought that up because adversity is a gift. And yes, it was it was the worst moment of my life. But it was up to me to make it mean something. And I think a lot of people miss that. Like you have to do the work in order to make that mean something. But one of the takeaways too, like we talk about we talked about the 4 things that are my non-negotiables. To kind of tell you where that came from, I asked the same question to every single person on my show. And it's a 2-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? The second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself? And what I realized was, although their answers were always different to the first part, the second part, those 3 things were always in some way to serve themselves, whether it was like working out, making sure to take downtime to spend with your family, meditating, like whatever it may be. And I was like, okay, there's a pattern here. Like there's a reason these people are successful, and I'm going to take these things that they're doing to become successful and implement them into my life. And so my 4 things are to serve me in some way, shape or form. So the first thing is I do a daily visualization practice every day. Sometimes it's big picture, like where do I see myself in 5-10 years? Where do I see my events going, and visualizing myself in those moments and tying it to the feeling that comes from that, and what does it feel like for me emotionally? What's it sound like? What's it smell like? What's it look like? All the senses I tie into this. Sometimes it's small, right? Like, oh, I have a podcast interview today. What's that going to go? How's it going to go? How am I going to approach it? How am I going to feel in the moment? So it all depends. So that's one, a visualization practice. Number two, I learn something new every day. I love the quote, obviously, look, my brand is growth. So I love the quote, what is not growing is dead. And so if I'm not learning, I can't teach. And if I'm not learning, I can't grow. And so I must constantly grow. So the second thing is learning. Third thing is I move my body in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's a 2-3 mile walk in the morning or lifting or whatever, I move my body in some way, shape, or form. And then the fourth thing is I reach out to somebody I care about every single day, and I just send them a quick text and I just say, hey, just thinking about you. Hope you're well. And not necessarily always exactly that script as I text it, but those are the four things. And it's funny, that fourth one, a lot of people hear it and they go, well, that's kind of for somebody else. Like, you're making somebody else feel good. But number one, it makes me feel good to know that I can make somebody feel good. And number two, what has ended up happening is I rarely go a day without getting a text from somebody just saying, hey, hope you're well, right? They kind of catch on. And you create this thing. And what's neat is, like, I teach this to people when, in our groups and stuff like that. I'm like, look, I want you to reach out to somebody right now. And it becomes part of their routine, and their network grows exponentially. And so I realized once I started doing those four things consistently, everything else became really easy. Like, my business started to grow organically. My relationships got better. I got healthier. I felt better every morning. And so once I did all those things, I was like, okay, these are my non-negotiables. Like, no matter what's going on in the world, I will do that. Now, there are some travel days where the working out doesn't necessarily make sense. Like, I woke up the last day of our retreat, and so I made everybody on the retreat take a walk both mornings. I'm like, hey, we're walking. So I walked them through my four things. And at the end, I told them, like, hey, here's my non-negotiables. But the last morning, we all woke up to kind of head home, and we had quite the late night at a karaoke bar the night before. And I walk out in the living room, and the small group that was there, they were like, hey, did you walk this morning? Right. So they're giving me a hard time. So there are days where it doesn't always happen because life, but I certainly try my best to make sure I check those off the list.
I love that you actually answered one of the other questions I had for you, which was based off of, I don't know if you've ever read the book Tribe of Mentors by Timothy Ferriss.
No, the funny thing is I have it, but I've never read it. Like, we all have the bookshelf. Let's be honest.
Yes,
but
totally.
I do have the book.
Well, in it, he interviews like 130 plus top performers, and he does the same thing, what you just described. He asked them the same, I think, 11 questions. And he came up with, here are the themes, and meditation was one of those that's now one of my non-negotiables. So I love that you have that. It's one of the reasons I love podcasting is, like you said, you widen your network, and the growth that you experience from that is I can't even describe. It's why I'm addicted to it. Yeah. So I love that you said that.
Yeah. And so I'm not the best. I'll say this about meditating. I'm not the best meditator. Like, I'm not good at shutting it all down. And look, I get it. I've talked to gurus. I've had coaches in the spiritual space. So, like, you're not supposed to be good at it. Like, there's no good at it. But that's kind of like the meditation side is more like my visualization. So I look at it as almost like an active meditation in a sense.
Oh, totally.
Like, I'm not in the moment. I'm somewhere else. And so for me, that's kind of like my meditation. I try and meditate here and there. It doesn't end up well.
I love that you share that, though. There's so many people that I talk to that are like, I don't even want to try it. And it doesn't mean you have to be sitting in a corner, in complete silence. So I love that people talk about alternative ways to meditate. What do you think has surprised you the most about starting and maintaining a podcast over 7 years?
That's a really good question that nobody's ever asked me. What has surprised me the most is the number one, the reality that consistency pays off, right? That compound effect of consistency is true. Like, you may go months or even years without seeing results. And so if you're able to push through those moments of hardships and push through those moments that you just want to quit, like, that's the reality, right? So when I started, I think I was like 40 something episodes in. I still had a co-host at the time. He was my co-host for the first 50 something episodes. And so you figure, we're almost a year in, and we were doing like 40, 50 downloads an episode. At the time, I didn't realize that 80% of shows that were doing less than 100 downloads an episode. I thought I was just a failure and nobody was paying attention. And somebody reached out to me and said, from Japan, and said, because of your show, I decided not to take my life. And it was that moment where I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep showing up, whether it's one person listening, or now I do upwards of 10,000 downloads an episode, which is crazy. But, at that point I was like, I'm just going to show up. And so from my perspective, it's the compound effect of consistency is you're always going to win. The other thing that really surprises me is the amount of people that quit so soon. Like, I think
Yes.
it's like 78% like stop in the first 7 episodes. I'm like, that's
Yes.
crazy. That's
To
crazy.
only give it that much. Yeah.
That's like ending a relationship after your first argument. Like, what are you doing? Like, just keep showing up, and that one really blows my mind. They call it pod fade in the
Pod
podcast
fade.
space. Yeah. And so that one,
Funny.
that really surprises me and upsets me a little bit too. Cause I'm like, you're literally giving up on something you've worked so hard on. Cause it does take a while to launch and do it the right way and
Oh,
all
yeah.
that stuff. So it's an interesting thing to see other people go through.
Yeah. How would you describe your intuition and using your intuition on your journey?
I would say that the reality is your intuition smacking you in the face at all times, but we often don't pay attention to it. And so for the longest time, I pushed against it. I pushed against my intuition and the next right step. And it really led me down some bad paths in business and relationships and all the things in between. And so I realized that I now just react quickly. If it's not something that serves me on a deeper level, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no, right? And so I think for me, I'm not one to go, here's how you tap into your intuition and this is how you do it. I go, here's the reality. What's smacking you in the face is your intuition. It is the way you're supposed to go. Is just pay attention to that and don't regret any of your decisions. Like, I have zero regrets in any of my life because I realized the bad decisions are lessons and the good decisions are blessings. And so, so I guess I should say they're both blessings, but you look at this and I just say, look, it's the first gut reaction. It's the first gut feeling. So even if it's a hell yes, and it's something that makes me uncomfortable, right? Like hiring a coach or paying a speaker to come in or whatever, where I get uncomfortable, I go, maybe I'll just wait. But my intuition keeps going back to, but this is the right thing. I have to lean into it, even if it makes my life a little uncomfortable for a time, right? Like hiring coaches at a high ticket level, which I've done multiple times now, is always a scary thing. But you realize when you find the right one, it just keeps coming back to, you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to do it. The first one, the last coach that I hired, I stalled for 4 months. And then finally hired them. And I was like, okay, fine, let's do it. Right. Cause it was a big amount of money.
Yeah. But
now I look at it and I go, if I just did it back then, if I did it 4 months earlier, I'd be 4 months further, if not more. Right. And so it's always pay attention to what's smacking you in the face and it's going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah. Can you describe that process specifically with money, with how you've grown and your idea of the energy of money and taking a leap like that? Because I talk to people about that a lot, but until they've done it, you can't really like fully understand it. But from an outside perspective, how did you decide to spend however much you did on a coach? Like how did you get that first leap, I guess, under your belt with money?
I think the first thing is to understand that it's okay to be uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, growth happens when you're uncomfortable. Like, if you're totally comfortable all the time, like, you're not going anywhere, right? Like, it's so funny. Like, when you get uncomfortable, you're not afraid of anything. And so I look at it from a standpoint of, say you become a recluse and you're in your house all the time and you're on the couch all the time. At some point over time, you're going to be afraid to go outside.
Yeah.
But if you're constantly outside, if you're constantly uncomfortable, the second you find that couch, you enjoy that moment a lot better. Right.
Yeah.
And so I go back to early on in my podcast career, when the podcast really started taking off. I started to get asked to speak at events, but the business had not taken off. So people would bring me in to talk about podcasting, and the business side of what I was doing had not taken off yet. I still had a day job. And so actually I got fired from my last day job right after I said yes to speaking at an event that I was not getting paid for. And so I got fired, and I was doing well in business. So I was living a great life, but I was that typical, like, made good money, spent really good money. And so I was still very much like month to month, like whatever, because I was enjoying it. And I remember really coming to a crossroads and going, I have 2 choices right now. I can either pay my rent or I can go speak at this event. And this was my first, like, what do I do moment. And so I ended up going to the event, speaking at it. And there wasn't like this, like, oh, I got 10 clients from speaking at this event and all of a sudden I was rich. But what happened was there was an evening where all the speakers went out for a drink. Right. So I'm sitting around the table with these people who are making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And I'm going, I'm broke. And they had no idea that I was broke. Yeah. And we're all sitting at this table. And the one speaker to the left of me, his name is Mike Kim. He ordered a drink. It was a $65 glass of scotch. And everybody around this table said, I'll have the same thing. Now, since she went clockwise, I was the last one. And there was this moment of like, I really like scotch. So it's not like I'm ordering a drink I didn't like. But I was like, I can't order a Miller Lite after all these people ordered a $65 glass of scotch. So I kind of took a big gulp and was like, I'll do the same thing. Right. And so, of course, I'm going, I don't even know if my card's going to go through. Like, this is crazy. I'm just glad when I checked into the hotel, it went through. And so I ordered my drink. And then, the waitress comes back after X amount of time and she goes, can I get you guys anything else? And Mike goes, I'll have another one. And she goes around the table and everybody says, I'll have another one too. And it came to me, I go, I'll have another one. So, the crazy thing is Mike Kim ended up paying for everybody's drinks that night. So I went unscathed. Yeah. But Mike and I had a really good conversation that taught me a lot of things about business and how to approach it. And after I went home, in the next 3 weeks, I made $22,000. And there was no going back. And it was that mindset shift. And I realized that getting uncomfortable leads to success. Now, it doesn't mean I still don't get uncomfortable. It's just at a higher level, right? Like it's just, more money's involved now. It's not a $65 drink. But with that being said, like I realized that I'm always going to get uncomfortable, but I know there's a win on the other side of it. Right. And so that's just a massive thing for me to go, okay, this is uncomfortable, but I really want to do it. And so I'm just going to do it. And so I don't know. And again, you can't walk somebody through that. I think they have to take that leap themselves. But I hope sharing a story like that or sharing everybody's story that goes through it, they go, you know what? This is the time that I'm going to do it. And they take that leap for themselves.
No, I love that story. It's such a great example because what I often share with people when I'm talking to them about maybe they want to come to one of my retreats and it's a ticket price that they haven't paid before. Like my unscripted retreat is $5,000. I share with them what you just described is this something that you really want? Is this experience something that you feel like you just makes your whole body excited? You're just like, yes, because if it is, the money piece will get figured out. So your description, that story is so beautifully perfect. I love it. And just stepping out to the unknown, not knowing how I'm going to pay for this 65 piece of scotch, but you're going to make it happen. So that's beautiful. Thank you.
I love that you shared that because, I always say to people like, look, I don't want to be, and I do similar things, right? High ticket events and high ticket coaching and all these things. And so I always say to them, like, I don't want to be the person who makes you uncomfortable. I want you to make you uncomfortable. Like if this is something that is pulling at you, then I'm the person. And sometimes it takes them a week or two. And sometimes they never come through, but I'll say this, there have been 3 people since posting about the retreat that was like, I wish I said yes. Right. So would you rather go and stress for a bit, or would you rather look back and go, you know what, that could have changed my life?
Yeah. The other aspect, which I'm guessing you've probably had experience with too, is learning to ask for help. And so the other thing that I've walked people through is I've had attendees who were like, I don't know how to make this happen. And I've said, well, have you asked anybody for help? And starting to get them to think about money in a different way. Like it doesn't have to just come from a paycheck from your job. It can come from a friend who really believes in you and says, hey, I've got an extra $1,000 I want to give you for this. And that has happened to people. So the whole process of asking for help too, and putting yourself out there is very vulnerable, I know, for people. But that can often be part of the solution too, and part of the lesson.
Yeah. 100%. Like that is something that makes me extremely uncomfortable, asking for help. Still to this day, but there are moments where you're like, okay, look, like I'm all in on what I believe is my purpose and what do I have to do to make a bigger impact. And sometimes it is having to make that ask. And it's not always like, hey, can I borrow a couple bucks? It could be anything. Hey, could I borrow some of your time? Like that's an uncomfortable thing too, especially when you're operating at a super, like I have friends that are worth $500 million. Like asking for something of them is very, very scary. You know what I mean? But you know what? You don't know unless you try. And if you do it from a respectful standpoint, then even if they say no, it doesn't damage the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. For somebody who's thinking about sharing their story, because I talk to a lot of people who have these stories that they know they want to share, but they're stuck. They're hesitating. Do you have any tips for people on how they can begin?
Yeah. I mean, so the first thing is that's clearly a limiting belief or a mindset issue. And so years and years ago, I had a guy on my show named Preston Smiles, and he shared at that time, he's like, at any given time on this planet, there are 75,000 people that need to hear your message specifically from you. And I said, well, what would you say to somebody who hesitates on that? And he said, how selfish of you. Like how selfish of you to be gifted something, a gift of adversity or struggle or whatever you're going through, to not share how you got through it with others. Right. And so one thing I always talk about often is like, we all have shit that we're going through. Like we all have things that are hurting us in this moment. We all have things that are tough to get through. Don't teach from there. So what I say is like your wound that you have right now, that's for you to learn. But when that wound becomes a scar, like you've done the work and you've gotten through it, when it becomes a scar, that's when you become a teacher. And so as you go through these things, I hope that you find the right mentor and the right person to help you through them. And then on the back end, once you get through them, you need to share this experience. You don't have to share it on a big stage. You don't have to share it on a podcast. No. Just share it in a conversation. And so I always say, start small, like have a conversation with somebody and see, and just watch their eyes light up, watch it change their life. And then in a sense, it becomes a drug. Like it becomes a drug to go, wow, like if I share this message, there's always somebody that goes, oh my gosh, like I've been through something like that. Like I can also get through this. Like I always used to jokingly say when I first started speaking on stages, I used to say, if you're looking at me thinking if that schmuck can do it, I can do it too, then that's the point, right? Like, so go share your message and inspire somebody to do the same. I mean, I think it's an insanely selfish thing to not share your lessons with others, right? Imagine going through trauma throughout your life and then having kids and then not sharing the lessons that you learned with your kids. It's the same thing. Like we're all still kind of kids, like trying to figure this out. Like I always say, like you may say, I don't know if you will, but you may say at the end of the show, where can people find you? And something I say is like, hey, look, here's the best way. Go find my podcast called The Growth Now Movement. And what I say at the end is, if you like it, come on the journey with me. Like we're all on a journey to try and figure stuff out. Nobody on this planet has it figured all out, right? Yeah. Like even Tony Robbins, right? Like he hasn't figured it all out. Like he's definitely got some things in his life where he's like, well, I kind of suck at that. And so we just find our strengths and we lean into that and we continuously grow, but share your journey, share what you've been through, share the lessons you've learned, because you could change a life. And how selfish of you not to do that?
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot. So for you, for moving forward, what's your ideal kind of a speaking event? Like what are you hoping and what are you wanting more of in 2023 and beyond? So that if somebody's listening and they're like, hey, I want to book Justin for this event, what's your ideal or what are you looking to do more of?
Yeah, I mean, so speaking on other people's stages is something that has been a major focus of mine. And so what I realized that my brand really started to take off in 2019, like really, really started to take off. And I was speaking monthly, multiple times a month, all over the country. And I was like, well, I'm getting there. And it wasn't quite at the huge stages, but I was speaking on stages or small companies or small retreats and et cetera, et cetera. And then I was like, 2020 is going to be the year for me that I'm going to hit these big stages, right? Like meaning like the people I have on my podcast, they're going to go, hey, come speak at my event. That was my thing in 2020. Well, we know what happened. The world shut down, events stopped. And so it didn't happen in 2020. But 2023 has been insane for me so far, including booking, somebody I look up to. Her name's Amberly Lago. She's amazing. She's got an event in March and I'm speaking there in March. And it's like that first big one. Like she shares the stages with some of my friends and mentors like Ed Milet and, all those individuals. And so she asked me to speak at her event and now I'm speaking to masterminds. So the size to me does not matter. To me, it's all about, does my message resonate with your audience? Whether it's 5 people or 5,000 people. 1, does my message resonate with your audience? And 2, can I make an impact in that room? Meaning, can I change one life? Can one person go, wow, because of what Justin went through, I feel like I can advance in life, or because what Justin said, I have this takeaway and now I need to make an adjustment. And so for me, it's not necessarily a vision of the exact thing. Sure, there's big goals, but one day I'd love to speak on a stage inside of a stadium. I think that'd be really cool. Like that's a fun thing. But for me, it's all about the impact, and that could be one person. It doesn't matter. And so I don't have an ideal event, just some visions and some goals. But for me, it's all about what kind of impact can I make when I walk into a room and meet the right people.
Okay. What are a couple of your top topics that you talk about when you speak to groups?
Yeah. So the main 2 that I speak on is number 1, how to overcome limiting beliefs. And the second one is surrounding yourself with the right 5 people, right? We all know the quote, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, from Jim Rohn. Well, I realized in my life that like when I was 19, right around that time of self-development, I heard that quote for the first time. And I was like, immediately, I'm like, I got to get rid of all my friends and I need to hang out with millionaires only. And then immediately I went, wait, why would millionaires hang out with me? And I became frozen even in that quote. Like that quote to me was intimidating. And so I went through life and kind of forgot about that quote, although you hear it all the time, but forgot about it in perspective to my own life. And then I realized I've created this success and I've created some really cool opportunities in my life. And I looked back and I said, well, who were my 5 people? And I talk about the avatars of these 5 people that you should have in your life at any given time. And if you do it the right way, you're able to set yourself up for that success to the next level, no matter what, right? Like if you have the right people, a failure becomes easier. If you have the right people, a win becomes greater. And so these 5 people that I have situated really have changed my life. And I realized I did it by accident before. And then it's become a great intention to make sure I always have these 5 people, almost like my front line of my army, right? Like I can go to battle with these people every single day and I'll win every single day. So those are the 2 main topics. And of course you sprinkle in your personal story. That's what makes people attached to it a little bit. But yeah, it's been a blessing. And it's that message really came through during COVID when I was able to slow down a little bit and I wasn't running to the next event in the next state and the next whatever. So, that was my blessing from COVID. It allowed me to slow down and really go, what is this growth now thing all about?
Okay. I love that. And so I know you shared with people already, like if they want to follow along on your podcast, definitely do that. Is there any other way that they could interact with you that you would recommend they check out?
Yeah, I mean, my podcast, like you mentioned, Instagram is my favorite place to hang out. I just crossed 6,000 followers. That was exciting because I was hanging out in the 5,000s, what seemed like forever.
Yes,
I'm like, come on. And, the bots get removed and it, drop down, whatever. But I crossed 6,000 followers. But that's my favorite place to hang out. I reply to every single DM. I reach out to people who follow me. I do all that stuff. And so for me, that's my favorite place to hang out and interact, because obviously with podcasting, it's hard to interact. But the Instagram is definitely something cool. And I'd say those are the top 2 places for me.
Okay. And then I always end every show with, what's your current I love it when for the world?
I love it when somebody is able to figure out why they were put on this planet and they begin to take the first step to create the impact that they need to create. Because again, I mean, this whole conversation and what we've been talking about has really been like, we all have something important to share to help others navigate their life. And the only way we do that is by living in our purpose and then purposely taking steps to make that impact. And so for me, I love it when people take that first step or they have that first realization, right? Like at the retreat this last weekend, or the immersion that I call it, there were so many of those eye-opening moments, including people like shutting down portions of their business to focus on the right things, right? Understanding that we're not living actually in our purpose and with our values. And so for me, it's really seeing those moments, and that's probably the thing that other than my loved ones, that's the thing that I love to see the most.
I love that. Thank you. Well, thank you for spending time with us. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube or listening on any podcast platform, I'll share his information in the description, and be sure to go follow him on Instagram and reach out to him. But thank you for the time. I love all of these topics that we touched on, some of my favorites.
Yeah, Mo, thank you so much for being awesome. Yeah. Like, I love what you're bringing to the world, and I love everything that you're doing. And it's so funny, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago at this point, it's fun to connect with people who go through the same things that you go through. Like, creating these events are, they're an emotional roller coaster in so many ways. And so when you talk to somebody else about it, you're like, oh, okay, it's not just me. It's not just me, right? So we talk about sharing, right? When you're able to share these things, it's it's not just me. So I'm not messing everything up, right?
No.
And so it's lovely what you're doing, and I'm glad to be a small part of it on this podcast. And just thank you so much.
Thank you.